A young girl from a small town in Idaho went to school and never returned, leaving her parents' world torn apart by grief and uncertainty. 2 years later, her mother zoomed in on Google Maps and spotted something shocking. The Sunday afternoon sun filtered softly through the curtains of the modest Airbnb in suburban New York. Rachel Warren sat on the living room sofa, her laptop open on the coffee table, her eyes heavy from the long, emotionally taxing journey from Idaho. At 36, she carried herself with the weary posture of someone who had been holding her breath for far too long. 2 years, to be exact. "Yes, we've just arrived in New York," her husband, Daniel, said into his phone, pacing the small living room. At 39, Daniel's once youthful face now bore deep worry lines that had etched themselves over the past 2 years of relentless searching. "We're ready to start with the investigation." "Yes, we can come to the station today." Rachel barely listened to her husband's conversation with the police. She focused instead on the laptop screen, typing in the address Daniel repeated from the phone call. Google Maps loaded, displaying the route from their Airbnb to the police station. "They said they'll be expecting us in about an hour," Daniel said after ending the call, running his hand through his graying hair. "I'm just looking at the area," Rachel murmured, zooming in and out on the map. New York was a world away from their home in Pine Hollow, a small, close-knit town in Idaho where everyone knew each other, where children could walk to school alone, where tragedies like theirs simply didn't happen until they did. 2 years ago, their daughter, Eugene, had vanished after attending a baptism class at their local church. She was last seen walking with friends across the street to their usual hangout spot, but never made it home. The search that followed consumed their lives, strained their marriage, and tested their faith more deeply than either could have imagined. Rachel scrolled around the map, familiarizing herself with the area surrounding their temporary home. They had specifically chosen this Airbnb for its proximity to Bryant Park, where a recent tip had led them. The anonymous caller was very specific. Rachel said, more to herself than to Daniel. So they saw a girl matching Eugene's description at a homeless community event near Bryant Park. It was the first credible lead they'd had in months. Previous tips had led nowhere, each one initially raising their hopes only to cruelly dash them later. But something about this call felt different, concrete enough to justify the cross-country journey on what might still be yet another wild goose chase. Rachel continued exploring the digital map, finding herself drawn to the area around Bryant Park. She noticed several small churches scattered around the neighborhood. "There are a lot of churches here," she said, a small measure of relief in her voice. "I was worried I wouldn't be able to attend service while we're here." Daniel nodded absently, unpacking his toiletry bag on the kitchen counter. Rachel understood his distance. Once a devoted man of faith, Daniel had withdrawn from church life after Eugene's disappearance. Unable to face the well-meaning but painful questions, the pitying looks, the theological platitudes that did nothing to bring their daughter back. Rachel, on the other hand, had clung more tightly to her faith, working in church administration in Pine Hollow, finding solace in prayer, even as doubt gnawed at her heart. "I've booked us for 2 weeks," Rachel said, "but we can extend if we need to." Daniel joined her on the sofa, the cushion dipping under his weight. "Let me see what you found." Rachel showed him the police department location, Bryant Park, and the various churches she'd discovered. "I think we have a good starting point." "Let's check the street view," Daniel suggested, taking over the touchpad. "I want to see what this Bryant Park looks like." Rachel watched as he navigated through the virtual streets, the familiar blue figure dragging through the digital representation of their search area. First, they viewed the community park, then began exploring the surrounding streets. "That's Mole Street," Rachel noted as they turned onto a residential road with a small church visible at the end. Daniel zoomed in closer as they approached the church, and that's when Rachel saw it. A girl in a pink hoodie walking with a man, their backs to the Google camera car. "Daniel," Rachel's voice caught in her throat, her fingers stabbing at the screen. "Look," she urged. The pink hoodie with the small decorative pattern on the back was identical to the one Eugene had been wearing the day she disappeared. Rachel had bought it for her 11th birthday, just 3 weeks before she vanished. It was etched in her memory like a brand. "Honey, Turn around, she pleaded, her heart racing. See if we can see their faces. Daniel manipulated the controls, trying to find another angle, but the faces were blurred out, as was standard in Google Maps Street View. They were only visible in a few frames, always from behind or at an angle that revealed nothing conclusive. Something about that man seems familiar, Rachel whispered, leaning closer to the screen, a flicker of recognition stirring within her. Daniel sighed, his shoulders slumping with familiar weariness. Rachel, this is the 100th time you've spotted a girl in a pink hoodie. You become fixated on that outfit. He reached for her hand, his voice softening. But I know how badly you want to find her. I do too. But we can't jump at every pink sweater we see. Rachel marked all the points of interest on the map anyway, then closed her laptop, a sense of disappointment washing over her. Daniel was right. They needed to be methodical, not impulsive. They had a plan. We should go, Daniel said, standing up. Let's not waste any more daylight. We'll go to the station first, talk to the police, get permission to put up missing person posters, and then check out Bryant Park with an officer. Rachel nodded, collecting the stack of freshly printed posters from their suitcase. Each one featured Eugene's smiling face, her bright eyes, her long hair, and the heartbreaking details of her disappearance. 2 years of distributing these posters had worn a groove in Rachel's heart, a constant ache of absence, but she wasn't giving up. She couldn't. As they headed to the car, Rachel couldn't shake the image of the pink hoodie on Mole Street. A mother knows, she thought to herself, a silent conviction settling deep within her soul. A mother always knows. Rachel drove carefully through the unfamiliar New York streets. Following the blue line on her phone's GPS, Daniel sat beside her, reviewing the case notes they compiled for the local police, his brow furrowed in concentration. Turn right at the next light, the robotic voice instructed. As they approached the intersection, Rachel realized they were passing Bryant Park. Look, she said, slowing down slightly. That's the park from the tip. The park was vibrant, even in the late afternoon sun. Children were playing, couples walked hand in hand, and a small gathering near a gazebo might have been a community event similar to the one described in the anonymous tip. Rachel felt an overwhelming urge to stop, to get out and search every face, to call Eugene's name until her voice gave out. We'll come back later, Daniel reminded her gently, sensing her thoughts, his hand resting on her arm. On our own, it might be fruitless. We need the help of trained eyes. Rachel nodded reluctantly and continued driving. But as they approached the next turn, she spotted a street sign, Mole Street, and without thinking, she signaled and turned. What are you doing? Daniel asked, his voice sharpening with surprise and frustration. This is the wrong way. Rachel kept her eyes on the road, a quiet determination hardening her resolve. I want to visit the church we saw on Google Maps, just for a moment. Rachel, we need to get to the police station, Daniel insisted, his voice tight with impatience. I need to pray, Daniel, she said, though they both knew that wasn't the full truth. The pull to this street, this church, was inexplicable but undeniable. Just a short prayer before we talk to the police. Daniel leaned back against the headrest, his frustration evident in the rigid set of his shoulders. There won't be a service at this time of day. We're wasting precious time. You can pray in the car. God will hear you regardless. He's not confined to church buildings. His voice took on a hint of bitterness that spoke of his own struggles with faith over the past 2 years. You know that doctrine well enough. Rachel remained silent, her eyes scanning the street, looking for any sign of a pink hoodie, any familiar face. The street was quiet in the late afternoon lull, a stark contrast to the bustling park they had just passed. You just wanted to check the street, didn't you? Daniel said, his tone resigned rather than accusatory. Well, you saw that girl walking. I know you, Rachel, but you won't find them there. Those are just past satellite images. I know, Rachel admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. But I just felt this pull. I can't explain it. The police will always be at the station, but I needed to respond to this call in my heart. Daniel studied his wife's profile, noticing the determined set of her jaw that had become so familiar over the past 2 years of their shared ordeal. He'd learned when to push and when to surrender, and he recognized this as one of the latter moments. The church came into view, a small brick building with a white cross above the entrance. Rachel pulled into the nearly empty parking lot and turned off the engine. "I'll wait outside," Daniel said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "I need some fresh air and to let the police know we'll be a bit late." Rachel watched him exit the car. His tall frame stooped slightly with the weight of their shared burden. They had once moved in perfect sync, their marriage a graceful dance of mutual support and understanding. Now they often felt like strangers sharing a tragedy, each processing their grief in ways the other couldn't fully comprehend. She gathered her purse and a small Bible she always carried, Eugene's name inscribed on the worn leather cover, a gift for her 10th birthday. The binding was worn smooth from Rachel's daily readings, from the desperate prayers whispered into its pages. As Rachel approached the church entrance, a sense of both trepidation and strange certainty washed over her. She couldn't explain the feeling, not to Daniel, not to herself, but something had drawn her to this specific place. Whether it was divine guidance or a mother's fierce intuition, she was going to follow it. She pulled open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, leaving Daniel to make his apologetic call to the police across the street. The cool, dim interior welcomed her like an old friend. The familiar scent of candles and polished wood offered a measure of comfort, even in this strange city. The church interior was quiet, with sunlight filtering through stained glass windows and casting colorful patterns on the wooden pews. Rachel stood for a moment, allowing her eyes to adjust to the dimmer light after the bright afternoon outside. A middle-aged man in casual clothes was cleaning one of the pews, methodically wiping down the wood with a cloth. No congregation was present, confirming Daniel's assumption about the timing of services. Rachel slowly approached, her footsteps echoing softly in the empty sanctuary. "Excuse me," she said softly. The man looked up, offering a friendly smile. "Hello there. Can I help you?" "I hope so," Rachel said, pulling out her phone. "I'm looking for information about a girl and a man I saw in this area." She opened Google Maps and showed him the blurred Street View image she'd saved. "I know it's not very clear, but I wondered if you might recognize them." The staff member squinted at the screen, studying the pixelated figures. His brow furrowed with concentration. "It's hard to tell with the blurring, but something about them does look familiar." He handed the phone back. "Are they friends of yours?" Rachel hesitated, unsure how much to share with a stranger, but compelled by the urgency in her heart. "I'm trying to find my daughter. She's been missing for 2 years, and I'm following every possible lead." The man's expression shifted to one of profound sympathy. "I'm so sorry to hear that." Before he could finish, the door to a back office opened, and 2 men stepped out. They were engaged in conversation, both wearing the distinctive clerical collars of Protestant ministers. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she studied the second man more closely. "Thank you for your help," she said hastily to the staff member, a newfound focus sharpening her senses, then made her way toward the 2 ministers. The pastor in the formal robe noticed her approach and paused his conversation. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" "Yes." "Hello," Rachel said, extending her hand, a rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I was just admiring your beautiful church." "Pastor Graham." The man introduced himself, shaking her hand. "I'm a senior pastor here. This is Evangelist Matthew, who's been guest preaching for us these past 2 weeks." "Evangelist Matthew," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, a name that resonated with a chilling familiarity. The minister looked at her with a moment of blank confusion before his expression cleared, a polite smile appearing. "I'm sorry. Have we met?" Rachel stepped closer, her gaze fixed on his face, searching for a flicker of recognition. "I'm Rachel Warren from Pine Hollow, Idaho. I work at First Protestant Church there. I was part of the team that invited you to preach at our Sunday service a few years ago." She smiled, trying to jog his memory, her mind racing. "I arranged your accommodations and helped with all the logistics for your visit." Evangelist Matthew continued to look at her with polite confusion, the smile unwavering but not reaching his eyes. Rachel pressed on, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "You led our prayer group and did an altar call. A woman in a wheelchair was healed. It was quite remarkable. Everyone talked about it for months. A flash of recognition, or what appeared to be recognition, finally crossed his face. Ah, yes, Rachel Warren, of course. What a blessed event that was. He smiled broadly, a professional practice smile. The Lord works in mysterious ways, doesn't he? I never forget a healing, though sometimes the faces of those who assist blur together after so many church visits. Rachel nodded, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. A traveling evangelist like Matthew would visit dozens of churches every year, his life a blur of new faces and places. It's a pleasure to see you again. Are you serving here now? Just a guest pastor, Matthew explained, his voice warm and confident, the unsettling feeling growing within Rachel. I'm here for 2 weeks before continuing my church tour. This is actually my final day. I'll be preaching at the evening service tonight, then catching a red-eye flight out of New York. What an incredible coincidence to meet you here, Rachel said, though in her heart she wondered if it was coincidence at all. Perhaps this was what had drawn her to this particular church, to this particular moment. God's hand guiding her steps, or something far more unsettling. Indeed, Matthew agreed, his gaze seemingly assessing her. What brings you to New York? So far from home. Rachel's smile faltered, the carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. My daughter, Eugene. She went missing 2 years ago, shortly after your visit to our church. Actually, she pulled out one of the posters from her bag, unfolding it with trembling hands to show them Eugene's photograph, her beloved daughter's smiling face a painful contrast to the grim reality. We received a tip that someone saw a girl matching her description near Bryant Park. My husband and I came immediately. Evangelist Matthew stared at the photo, his expression unreadable for a moment that stretched into an eternity. He seemed to stiffen slightly, a subtle tension in his posture that Rachel wasn't certain if she was imagining or if it was a vital clue. Pastor Graham moved forward, placing a comforting hand on Rachel's arm, his kindness a stark contrast to the unsettling presence of the evangelist. Oh, my dear, what a terrible ordeal for your family. Let us pray together for Eugene's safe return. The three of them formed a small circle, Pastor Graham taking Rachel's hand in his. Evangelist Matthew joined after a slight, almost imperceptible hesitation, his hand cool and dry in hers. Pastor Graham led a heartfelt prayer for Eugene's safety and for God's guidance in the search, his words a balm to Rachel's aching soul. When they finished, Evangelist Matthew stepped forward and embraced Rachel. The hug was friendly at first, the kind offered by a fellow member of the faith community, but then it tightened, almost as if he was holding her in place, preventing her escape. Rachel felt a moment of profound discomfort as he seemed to inhale deeply, as though taking in her scent, a strange, unsettling gesture that felt invasive, inappropriate, not at all like the comforting embrace of a spiritual leader. As they separated, Rachel noticed something strange, something that made the blood drain from her face. In the breast pocket of Matthew's suit, partially visible for just a split second, was what appeared to be a photograph. The image was facing inward, but the paper was thin enough that Rachel could make out the silhouette of what looked like a young girl. Before she could fully process what she'd seen, Matthew straightened his jacket, noticing the protruding edge of the photo with a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, and quickly tucked it deeper into his pocket. A photo of my daughter, he explained smoothly, his voice effortless, masking any trace of discomfort. I carry it everywhere. She's always in my heart. Rachel nodded, trying to hide her unease, trying to reconcile the man of God with the strange sensations she was experiencing. The silhouette had looked familiar. Too familiar. We'll certainly mention your daughter to our congregation at tonight's service, Pastor Graham assured her, his genuine concern a small comfort. Many eyes are better than few when searching for someone. Thank you, Rachel said, gathering her composure, the need to escape this unsettling encounter growing stronger with each passing second. I should go. My husband is waiting, and we need to get to the police station. As she turned to leave, She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The way Evangelist Matthew had reacted to Eugene's photo, the strange embrace, the fleeting glimpse of the photograph in his pocket, all of it sent warning signals screaming through her mind. But surely she was being paranoid. This was a man of God, respected in many churches across the country, a pillar of the community. Still, as she walked toward the exit, Rachel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the church's air conditioning. Rachel stepped out of the church into the warm afternoon sun, her mind racing, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The suspicion that had taken root inside couldn't be easily dismissed, no matter how irrational it might seem to others, to Daniel especially. She spotted her husband sitting in their rental car, the driver's side door open to catch the breeze, his face a mask of impatience. His expression was thunderous, and she steeled herself for his frustration. "What took you so long?" Daniel demanded as she approached, his voice tight with annoyance. "You've wasted 30 minutes on this detour. The police are waiting for us." Rachel slid into the driver's seat, but kept the door open, needing space, needing air, needing to articulate the swirling chaos of her thoughts. "Daniel, you won't believe who I just met inside. Evangelist Matthew, the one who visited our church in Pine Hollow about 2 years ago, right before Eugene disappeared." Daniel looked unimpressed, a skeptical arch to his brow. "So, there's something off about him," Rachel insisted, lowering her voice despite being alone in the car, a sense of urgency making her words tumble out. "When I hugged him, he held me too tight, like he was, I don't know, smelling me or something. And he had a photograph in his pocket. I only saw it for a second, but the silhouette looked like Eugene." "Rachel," Daniel began, his tone suggesting he was about to dismiss her concerns as the product of grief and desperation. "I know how it sounds," she interrupted, her voice tight with emotion, "but I'm not imagining things." When I showed him Eugene's photo, he reacted strangely. He seemed startled. Daniel's expression softened slightly as he registered the raw urgency in her voice, the tremor in her hands gripping the steering wheel. "Look, we've served in church together for years. We know how respected evangelists like him are. If what you're suggesting is true, it would shock a lot of people." "I'm not saying I'm certain," Rachel clarified, running a hand through her hair, the unsettling feeling persisting. "I'm just saying something doesn't feel right. My gut is screaming." Daniel rubbed his temples, clearly torn between supporting his wife and maintaining a semblance of rationality in a situation that had become anything but rational. "Let's just go to the police station as planned. They're waiting for us. We can sort all this out there. If your suspicions have any merit, they'll know how to proceed." Rachel nodded reluctantly, knowing he was right, yet hating the idea of leaving this place, this street, where she had felt that strange, undeniable pull. "You're right. With police presence, we can always ask Pastor Graham for the evangelist's contact information later, if needed." Before they could continue their discussion, the church doors opened, and Evangelist Matthew emerged, a briefcase in one hand, a coat slung over his arm. He waved goodbye to Pastor Graham, saying something about returning before the evening service, then spotted Rachel and Daniel and offered a friendly wave as he walked to his car, which was parked next to theirs. As Matthew opened his car door, Rachel was hit by a wave of scent wafting from the vehicle's interior. A sweet vanilla fragrance that she recognized instantly, a scent that had been a constant, comforting presence in their home before Eugene's disappearance. It was Eugene's favorite perfume, the one Rachel had given her for Christmas the year before she vanished. Eugene had worn it daily, cherishing it as her grown-up smell. Rachel felt her blood turn to ice, her heart hammering against her ribs with a sudden, terrifying certainty. This couldn't be a coincidence. Matthew reversed out of his parking space and drove away, seemingly unaware of the bombshell he had just dropped in Rachel's lap. "Get in the car, Daniel," Rachel said urgently, already climbing back into the driver's seat, her movements sharp and decisive. "Close the door." Daniel complied, confused by her sudden intensity, the change in her demeanor palpable. "What is it? Didn't you smell that?" Rachel asked, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Smell what?" When he opened his car door, That vanilla scent, she explained, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and a dawning, terrifying hope. It's Eugene's perfume, the one I gave her that she wore every day. Daniel stared at his wife, concern clouding his expression. Rachel, you're connecting dots that might not be there. Vanilla is an extremely common scent. It could be his daughter's perfume, or his wife's, or even an air freshener. Rachel turned the key in the ignition, the engine turning over with a roar that seemed to echo the turmoil in her heart. I feel a call in my heart about this, Daniel. A strong one. I need to follow it. And go where? Chase after a respected evangelist based on a smell? Daniel's voice rose in exasperation, the tension between them reaching a breaking point. I just want to confirm it. The call, Rachel insisted, her gaze fixed on the street where Matthew's car had disappeared. If I'm wrong, I'll admit it, and we'll go straight to the police station as planned. But I need to do this. Daniel threw up his hands in exasperation, his frustration boiling over. Now you're spiritualizing everything. This is exactly how false prophets gain followings in this country. People following gut feelings and calls instead of reason. The accusation stung, especially coming from Daniel, the man who had always been her rock. Rachel reversed out of the parking space, her jaw set in fierce determination. I'm not claiming to be a prophet. I'm a mother who's worked in church administration long enough to know when something doesn't add up with a pastor. Daniel turned to stare out the window, his posture rigid with frustration and disbelief. Fine, do whatever you want, but when you embarrass yourself because of this wild goose chase, don't say I didn't warn you. The car filled with a tense silence as Rachel pulled onto Mole Street, following in the direction the evangelist had gone. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drumbeat torn between the terrifying fear of being right and the crushing fear of being wrong. If she was mistaken, she was delaying their meeting with the police for nothing, potentially jeopardizing their only real lead. But if she was right, they might finally find Eugene. Rachel tightened her grip on the steering wheel and pressed on, following the instinct that had brought her to this moment, a mother's intuition that refused to be silenced, a voice in her heart that was louder than any doubt. Rachel maintained a careful distance behind evangelist Matthew's car, making sure to stay far enough back that he wouldn't notice them following, yet close enough to keep him in sight. Daniel sat beside her in stony silence, his arms crossed over his chest, his disagreement radiating from every pore, a palpable wall of tension between them. "This is ridiculous," he muttered after several minutes, the words heavy with disapproval. "We can't call the police because we have nothing but your suspicions and a vanilla scent. We're wasting valuable time. Just bear with me," Rachel pleaded, her eyes fixed on the evangelist's dark sedan, a desperate hope fueling her persistence. "If I'm wrong, I'll never do something like this again." They followed the car into a residential neighborhood where the houses were larger and more spaced out than in the area around their Airbnb. Finally, Matthew pulled into the driveway of an attractive two-story home with a well-maintained garden. An Airbnb sign stood prominently outside. Rachel drove past slowly, then parked around the corner where they could still observe the house without being obvious. She killed the engine and waited, the silence in the car thick with unspoken tension. "Now what?" Daniel asked, his patience clearly wearing thin, his voice sharp with exasperation. "Now we watch," Rachel said simply, her gaze fixed on the house, every fiber of her being on high alert. Matthew exited his car and went into the house, closing the door behind him. Minutes ticked by in agonizing silence as Rachel and Daniel sat in their parked car, the tension between them thickening with each passing second. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, the front door opened again. A woman emerged carrying 2 large suitcases, which she loaded into the trunk of Matthew's car. She was in her mid-30s with dark hair, pulled back in a professional-looking bun. She disappeared back into the house only to reappear moments later with a smaller suitcase, child-sized. "He said he was leaving New York tonight after the service," Rachel whispered, the pieces of a terrifying puzzle beginning to fit together in her mind, even though the picture was still blurred. The woman went back inside and shortly afterward returned to the doorway with a young girl. The child looked to be about 8 or 9 years old with blonde hair and neat pigtails, dressed in bright, cheerful clothes. The girl gave Evangelist Matthew a kiss on the cheek as he appeared in the doorway behind her, and he hugged her briefly before waving goodbye. As the girl turned to walk to the car with the woman, Rachel strained to see her face, hoping against hope, her heart pounding in her ears. But it wasn't Eugene. The features were all wrong. The hair color was different. The build was much smaller than Eugene would be now after 2 years. "See," Daniel said softly, though without triumph, a note of weary sadness in his voice. That must be his daughter, just like he said. Rachel's hope deflated like a punctured balloon, the brief, intoxicating rush of possibility dissolving into crushing disappointment. She had been so certain, so convinced that her instincts were leading her toward Eugene. Now she felt foolish, exactly as Daniel had predicted. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears pricking at her eyes, a bitter taste of failure in her mouth. "I really thought, I was so sure." Daniel's expression softened as he placed a comforting hand on her arm, his earlier frustration replaced by empathy. "It's okay, Ratch. You're a mother looking for her child. Anyone would grasp at straws in your position." Rachel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, the weight of her disappointment heavy on her chest. The photograph she'd glimpsed, the vanilla scent. Had she imagined their significance? Had grief and desperation led her to create connections where none existed? "Let's switch seats," Daniel suggested gently, his voice kind. "I'll drive us to the police station." They got out and exchanged places, Rachel slumping into the passenger seat, emotionally drained by the roller coaster of hope and disappointment she had just endured. Daniel started the car, but didn't immediately put it in gear. "Rachel, I need you to set the Google Maps to the police station. I have no idea where we are." Rachel pulled out her phone, her movements mechanical as she typed in the address, the familiar blue line appearing, guiding them back toward their original destination. As Daniel began to drive, Rachel kept her eyes fixed on the evangelist's house until it disappeared from view, a nagging feeling of unease still lingering, a sense that she had missed something vital, that a crucial piece of the puzzle was still eluding her. But for now, she had to accept that her suspicions had led nowhere. It was time to return to their plan, to meet with the police who might actually help them find Eugene. Rachel leaned her head against the window, watching the unfamiliar New York landscape slide by, the towering buildings a stark contrast to the open spaces of Idaho. 2 years of searching, of following leads that went nowhere, of enduring the pitying looks from friends and family who had long since given up hope. It had worn her down to her core, leaving her emotionally raw and exhausted. Yet something inside her refused to surrender, refused to accept that Eugene might never come home. That something, call it faith, call it maternal instinct, had brought them across the country on the slim chance of finding their daughter. And despite this latest disappointment, Rachel knew she would continue following it, wherever it led, for as long as it took, because a mother never stopped searching for her child. Never. Rachel continued to watch the road, still keeping an eye out for the evangelist's car, a faint, persistent hope flickering within her despite the recent setback. So far, it seemed they were headed in the same general direction, out of the residential area and back toward the main thoroughfares. "Look," Rachel said suddenly, pointing ahead, her voice sharp with renewed urgency. "They're turning." Daniel sighed, but slowed down slightly, watching as the car carrying the woman and the young girl turned into what appeared to be a playground with an attached cafe, a cheerful, vibrant spot that seemed out of place in the context of Rachel's grim suspicions. Through the chain-link fence, Rachel could see several children gathered outside, seemingly waiting, their faces bright with anticipation. "Daniel, slow down more," Rachel urged, a powerful instinct compelling her to see what was happening. "I want to see what's happening." "No," Daniel said firmly, accelerating instead, his jaw set. "No more side missions, Rachel. We're already late for our appointment with the police. We're going straight there now." Rachel craned her neck, trying to see as much as possible as they drove past the playground. She caught a glimpse of the woman greeting another adult, the small girl joining a group of waiting children. But then they were past it, the scene disappearing behind them, leaving Rachel with a sense of frustrating incompleteness. She slumped back in her seat, her hope deflating once more, the weight of her disappointment returning with crushing force. "Daniel, I'm sorry, but—" "No," he interrupted, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his voice tight with a weariness that mirrored her own. "We need to learn from this, Rachel. Gut feelings can be misleading. They can make us see connections that aren't there." Rachel fell silent, knowing he was right, yet unable to shake the nagging feeling that they had missed something important. The vanilla scent, the photograph, the suitcases, it all meant something. She was sure of it, but without concrete evidence, she couldn't expect Daniel or the police to take her seriously. They drove in tense silence for several minutes before Daniel spoke again, his voice gentler now, the anger replaced by a quiet understanding. "I know how badly you want to find her, Ratch. I do too. But we need to be methodical to work with the authorities." "I know," Rachel whispered, staring out the window, the city lights blurring through her unshed tears. When they finally arrived at the police station, it was nearly an hour later than their scheduled appointment time. They entered the busy precinct, the air thick with the sounds of ringing phones and hurried conversations, approaching the front desk officer. "We have an appointment with Detective Morris," Daniel explained, his voice tired, "about our missing daughter, Eugene Warren. We're a bit late, I'm afraid." The officer checked his computer, then glanced up with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, but Detective Morris is in another meeting right now. He had to move on when you didn't arrive at the scheduled time." Daniel shot Rachel a pointed look before turning back to the officer, his frustration evident. "How long until he's available?" "Probably a few hours," the officer replied. "You're welcome to wait, or you could come back later." Daniel thanked him and guided Rachel back outside, his disappointment palpable in every line of his body. "See what happens when we waste time?" he said once they were outside, his voice laced with frustration. "Now we have hours to kill." Rachel nodded, accepting the criticism without argument, the weight of her mistake heavy on her shoulders. "I'm sorry, Daniel. Truly." His expression softened slightly at her genuine remorse. "The officer mentioned there's a diner nearby. I haven't eaten since breakfast, and I'm guessing you haven't either." "You go ahead," Rachel suggested, needing space, needing time to process the whirlwind of emotions. "I think I need to walk around a bit, clear my head. There are some interesting architectural buildings around here." Daniel hesitated, clearly torn between staying with her and giving her the space she needed. Finally, he nodded. "All right, take your phone and stay in touch. I'll text you when the detective is ready to see us." Rachel watched as Daniel walked toward the diner across the street, his shoulders slumped with the weight of their shared burden. She felt a pang of guilt for the wild goose chase she'd led him on, for the delay that had cost them their appointment, for the hope she'd raised only to have it dashed so completely. But underneath that guilt, the suspicion still gnawed at her. She couldn't let it go. Not yet. Rachel began walking, allowing her feet to carry her without a specific destination in mind, her steps echoing softly on the pavement. The streets around the police station were busy with midday activity, but she barely noticed the people passing by, her thoughts consumed by the morning's events, by the image of the pink hoodie, the vanilla scent, the fleeting glimpse of the photograph. She pulled out her phone and opened Google Maps again, returning to the Street View image that had started all of this. The girl in the pink hoodie and the man walking beside her. She zoomed in as much as the pixelated image would allow, studying every detail, searching for something, anything, that might confirm her unsettling suspicions. Something about the man's posture, the way he held himself. She was sure it was Evangelist Matthew. The more she stared at the image, the more certain she became, a cold dread settling in her stomach. Acting on impulse, fueled by a desperate need for answers, Rachel dialed a number from her contacts list. Melissa, a fellow church staff member back in Pine Hollow, a trusted friend who had worked closely with her for years. "Rachel," Melissa answered on the third ring, her voice filled with concern. "Is everything okay? Did you find Eugene?" "Not yet," Rachel replied, continuing to walk as she spoke, her voice low and urgent. "But I need your help. Do you remember Evangelist Matthew?" He visited our church about 2 years ago, right before Eugene disappeared. Of course, I remember him, Melissa said without hesitation. The healing service was incredible. I need you to find everything you can about him, Rachel explained, her gaze sweeping across the unfamiliar buildings around her. His background, his seminary education, anything you can dig up. Also, that woman in the wheelchair who was healed. What was her name? Can you find her contact information? She filled out a visitor card, and we recorded her testimony afterward. I can look through the archives, Melissa promised, her voice laced with curiosity and concern. But what's this about, Rachel? I'm not sure yet, Rachel admitted, the unsettling feeling intensifying with each passing moment. But I've run into the evangelist here in New York, and something doesn't feel right. Call it intuition. I'll see what I can find and call you back, Melissa said, a note of caution in her voice. Be careful, Rachel. After ending the call, Rachel continued walking, her eyes scanning her surroundings more attentively now, a heightened sense of awareness sharpening her senses. She passed several impressive buildings, her architectural interest momentarily overriding her troubled thoughts. An intersection, a large, imposing building caught her eye. A sign outside identified it as a Lutheran dormitory, with a vast green yard stretching along its side. Rachel crossed the street for a closer look, curious about the facility. In her experience, Lutheran dormitories were uncommon. Catholic monasteries were more typical. Taking out her phone, she snapped a few photos of the interesting building, a small distraction from the heavy weight of her worries. Perhaps she could visit the dormitory office and ask about its history. It would help pass the time while waiting for Detective Morris to become available. As she approached the entrance, a familiar car pulled into the dormitory's parking lot. Rachel stopped in her tracks, her heart leaping in her throat, a jolt of adrenaline coursing through her veins. It was Evangelist Matthew's car, but Matthew himself wasn't driving. Instead, it was the woman from the Airbnb with the small blonde girl visible in the passenger seat. Rachel instinctively ducked behind a large shrub, her body tensing, her eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before her. She watched as the woman parked and exited the vehicle, leaving the door open, standing beside the car as though waiting for something. Minutes later, a dormitory keeper in a Lutheran nun-style uniform emerged from the building, leading a small group of children, their faces expectant. Each child carried a small suitcase, similar to the one Rachel had seen the woman loading into the car earlier. The children lined up beside the vehicle as the woman helped them load their suitcases into the trunk. Rachel counted 5 children in total, all appearing to be between 7 and 12 years old. And then, like a miracle, like an answer to 2 years of desperate prayers, like a scene unfolding in slow motion, Rachel saw her. Eugene, her daughter's face, older than in the missing person posters, her hair shorter now, but unmistakable. The eyes, the mouth, the small dimple in her cheek when she smiled. Rachel would recognize them anywhere, in any crowd, at any distance. For a moment, Rachel couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. Time seemed to stand still as she stared at her daughter, alive and only yards away after 2 endless, agonizing years of searching. A sob choked in her throat, a wave of overwhelming emotion washing over her. With trembling hands, Rachel reached for her phone and called Daniel. Rachel, he answered immediately, his voice laced with concern. Daniel, she managed to say, her voice shaking, barely a whisper. I found her. I found Eugene. Get the car and come to me now. I'm sharing my location. What? Where are you? Daniel's voice was sharp with confusion and alarm. It's her, Daniel. I'm sure of it. She's getting into a car with that woman from the evangelist's house. Rachel's voice was a desperate plea. Please, hurry and call the police. She ended the call and quickly shared her location with Daniel, her fingers fumbling with the screen, then turned her attention back to the scene unfolding in the parking lot. The woman was ushering the children into the car, preparing to leave. Rachel knew she couldn't wait for Daniel or the police. If that car drove away with Eugene inside, she might lose her daughter all over again, the thought a terrifying stab of pain. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Rachel stepped out from her hiding place and ran toward the group, calling out as she approached, her voice hoarse with emotion. Eugene! Eugene! The woman at the car saw her coming and reacted with alarm, her eyes widening in surprise and fear. She quickly told the children to get inside and close the doors, her movements hurried and frantic. She rushed to the driver's seat, thanking the dormitory keeper who stood by, looking confused by the sudden commotion. Before the woman could start the engine, Rachel reached the car and pounded on the window, her eyes locked on her daughter in the back seat, their gazes meeting across the glass. Eugene's expression transformed from confusion to shock, her eyes wide with disbelief. She rolled down the window, her voice a hesitant whisper, "Mom, is that you?" Then, turning to the woman in the driver's seat, Eugene asked in a bewildered voice that broke Rachel's heart, "Did God make my mom alive again?" The woman started to say something, a panicked explanation perhaps, but Rachel was already opening the back door, reaching for her daughter, gathering Eugene in her arms, pulling her close, the feeling so familiar, yet so desperately missed, that it brought tears streaming down her face, tears of relief, of joy, of 2 years of pent-up grief. "It's really me, sweetheart," Rachel whispered into her daughter's hair, inhaling the sweet, familiar scent of her child. "I'm alive, and I've been looking for you every single day since you disappeared." The dormitory keeper approached, clearly confused and alarmed by the scene unfolding before her. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Rachel looked up, her arms still wrapped tightly around Eugene, as though she might vanish again if she let go. "This is my daughter. She was kidnapped from our hometown in Idaho 2 years ago. We've been searching for her ever since." The dormitory keeper's face paled at Rachel's words, her eyes darting between Rachel, Eugene, and the woman in the driver's seat, her confusion deepening into horror. "I don't understand. These children are under the care of Pastor Matthew's ministry. They're orphans he's taken in." Before Rachel could respond, a car screeched to a halt at the entrance of the parking lot, and Daniel leapt out, his eyes frantically scanning the area until they landed on Rachel and the girl in her arms, a raw, animal sound escaping his lips. "Eugene!" he called out, his voice cracking with emotion, disbelief, and overwhelming joy mingling in the single word. Eugene turned at the sound, her eyes widening in disbelief, a radiant smile spreading across her face. "Dad, you're alive too." Daniel ran to them, enveloping both Rachel and Eugene in a tight embrace, his body shaking with silent sobs, the three of them a tangled mass of relief and love in the middle of the parking lot. "You found her," he whispered to Rachel, his voice thick with emotion, tears streaming down his face. "You actually found her." Meanwhile, the woman in the driver's seat, her face pale with panic, closed her door and appeared to be making a phone call, probably to the evangelist, her movements hurried and nervous. She started the engine, clearly intending to leave with the other children still in the car. Daniel broke away from the embrace and strode to the front of the vehicle, his face flushed with righteous anger, slamming his fist on the hood. "Don't you dare move this car," he shouted, his voice booming across the parking lot. The wail of police sirens filled the air as multiple patrol cars converged on the scene, responding to Daniel's frantic emergency call. Officers emerged, weapons drawn, quickly assessing the volatile situation. "Police! Everyone, stay where you are," one officer commanded, approaching cautiously, his voice calm and authoritative. Daniel raised his hands to show he wasn't a threat, his gaze fixed on the woman in the car. "My name is Daniel Warren. That's my wife, Rachel, and we've just found our daughter, Eugene, who was kidnapped 2 years ago. This woman," he pointed to the driver, his voice hard, "is involved in her abduction." Police secured the scene quickly, helping the other frightened children out of the car, their faces etched with fear and confusion. The dormitory keeper attempted to calm them, clearly as shocked by the unfolding events as the children themselves. She admitted she's the evangelist's assistant. An officer informed Rachel and Daniel as they stood protectively near Eugene, their daughter clinging to Rachel's side, her small hand clutching her mother's shirt. Says these children are part of his ministry and discipleship program, but not his biological children. They're kept here at the dormitory during his tour. Rachel held Eugene close, her heart aching for the other children, their innocent faces now marked by fear and uncertainty. This is my missing daughter, and these other children, they're likely taken from their families too. The police nodded grimly, the gravity of the situation becoming increasingly clear. We'll need to confirm that at the station. Officers checked each child, ensuring none were physically harmed before arranging for transport to the police station. The dormitory keeper agreed to accompany them, informing her staff of her absence. "Where is the evangelist now?" an officer asked the assistant, her voice sharp. "He's resting at the Airbnb," she replied, looking panicked, her gaze darting nervously around the parking lot. "He told me to take Mila and the other children with his luggage somewhere near the airport. He said he'd join us after the evening service." Rachel quickly described her earlier interaction with the evangelist at the church, including her unsettling suspicions that had led her here: the pink hoodie, the vanilla scent, the photograph. The police coordinated with a backup team to go to the evangelist's Airbnb for his arrest. "We're coming with you," Daniel insisted, his arm protectively around Eugene, unwilling to let his daughter out of his sight. The officers agreed, though they made it clear the family would need to remain in the police vehicle, the official procedure a necessary formality in the midst of their personal miracle. Eugene refused to leave Rachel's side, clinging to her mother as if afraid she might disappear again, the trauma of her abduction still raw and present. The other children and the dormitory keeper were placed in different cars, all bound for the police station, their fates uncertain, but now, at least, in the hands of the authorities. As they drove away, Rachel held her daughter close, hardly daring to believe that their nightmare was finally ending, that the long, dark tunnel had finally opened into the light. When they arrived at the evangelist's Airbnb, multiple police cars already surrounded the property, their flashing lights illuminating the suburban street. Through the window of their police vehicle, Rachel watched as officers escorted the handcuffed evangelist from the house toward a waiting patrol car. Their eyes met briefly as he was led past, and Rachel felt a chill run through her, a sense of profound sadness and betrayal. The photograph she had glimpsed earlier slipped from his pocket onto the ground as he was being put into the police car. An officer retrieved it, bringing it to show Rachel and Daniel. It was indeed a portrait of Eugene, her smiling face a stark contrast to the grim circumstances. There were also pictures of other children, their faces unknown, their stories yet to be told. At the police station, Rachel checked her phone while Eugene was being gently interviewed by a female officer in a special room designed for child witnesses, a safe, comforting space in the sterile environment of the precinct. She had a missed call from Melissa, her fellow church staff member in Pine Hollow. She excused herself to return the call, stepping just outside the room where she could still see Eugene through the glass panel in the door, her daughter's presence a constant, reassuring anchor. "Melissa, it's Rachel." "Rachel, I've been trying to reach you," Melissa said, her voice urgent. "I found some troubling information about Evangelist Matthew. It seems he never completed seminary school like he claimed. We didn't catch that when we vetted him before his visit because we relied on the credentials he emailed us, which must have been forged. And that woman, the first-time visitor in the wheelchair, I would question the authenticity of her healing. She never returned to our church after Evangelist Matthew left." Rachel wasn't surprised. She had expected as much, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place, revealing a disturbing picture of deception and manipulation. "We found Eugene, Melissa. She's safe with us now." A gasp came from the other end of the line, a mixture of shock and overwhelming relief. "Oh, thank God. But what does this have to do with the evangelist?" "He's the one who took her," Rachel explained, her voice low and filled with a cold certainty. "There are other children, too. Police are still investigating the case." That's monstrous," Melissa whispered, her voice filled with horror. "I did some more digging, and I found that his real name is Derek Lanton. When I searched that name, I found an entirely different history than what he presented to us. Derek Lanton, Rachel repeated, the name feeling venomous on her tongue, a bitter taste of betrayal. He used the credibility of the church to gain access to vulnerable children, and we invited him in. You couldn't have known, Rachel, Melissa said softly, her voice full of compassion. None of us could. After ending the call, Rachel ran a quick internet search for the name Derek Lanton. The results confirmed what Melissa had said. The man they knew as Evangelist Matthew shared the same face as Derek Lanton, a man with a history of fraud charges in other states, a chilling confirmation of the darkness they had unknowingly invited into their lives. Rachel returned to the family room, sharing what she'd learned with Daniel, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. I feel responsible, she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. I was the one who checked his credentials before we invited him to speak at our church. I should have been more thorough. Daniel shook his head, his hand reaching for hers, his gaze filled with love and understanding. This isn't on you, Rachel. Con artists like him are experts at manipulation. You had no reason to suspect he was anything other than what he claimed to be. It wasn't your mistake. He saw her distress and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. God led us here, he said softly, his faith, though tested, still present. What was meant for harm has been turned to good. Before they could discuss it further, Detective Morris entered the room. He was a serious-looking man in his 50s with kind eyes that belied his stern expression. Eugene stood next to him, her hand clasped in his, her face tired but safe. The family was escorted to a private room where Detective Morris joined them, his presence a comforting symbol of justice. Mr. and Mrs. Warren, he began, taking a seat across from them, his voice gentle. First, let me say how glad I am that you found your daughter. Cases like these don't often have such happy endings. Eugene had agreed to share all the details with them personally, a testament to her resilience and the strength of their family bond, even though she had told the officers everything about what had happened since her disappearance. After the baptism class, I was walking with my friends, but we split up at the corner, she explained, her voice soft but clear, recounting the terrifying events of that day. Father Matthew, that's what he made us call him, appeared in his car and told me Mom and Dad had been in a terrible accident. Rachel's heart clenched at her daughter's words, the cruelty of the deception almost unbearable. I believed him because we're a religious family, and I thought priests always told the truth. Eugene continued, her voice trembling slightly. He took me to a funeral where I saw photos of Mom and Dad, and the coffins, too. A fake funeral? Rachel whispered, horrified by the elaborate deception, the depth of the man's cruelty. Eugene nodded, tears filling her eyes, spilling onto her cheeks. I couldn't believe it when I saw you today. I prayed every day for you to return, even though Father Matthew said I'd only see you again in heaven. When asked what the man had done to her, Eugene explained, her voice hesitant. He would take us in turns to his room. We'd watch movies and play board games. He said we were there to test and strengthen his faith in God. The chilling simplicity of her words spoke volumes about the manipulation and emotional abuse she had endured. The rest of the interview focused on Rachel and Daniel, who provided their account of events, their journey of 2 years culminating in this moment of truth and justice. Rachel explained how she had found Eugene through a combination of coincidence, intuition, and unwavering persistence, a mother's love overriding all doubt and fear. Detective Morris explained that they had determined Matthew, or rather Derek Lanton, was a charismatic but manipulative predator who had preyed on the trust people placed in religious figures. He appears to have taken children while traveling between churches, the detective explained, his voice grim. He must have used forged credentials. We'll be investigating thoroughly. What happens now? Daniel asked, his arm protectively around Eugene, his focus solely on the safety and well-being of his family. We've arrested both the man known as Evangelist Matthew, or Derek Lanton, which is his real name, and his assistant, Carla Benson. The detective confirmed, his words a welcome relief. They're facing multiple charges, including kidnapping, fraud, identity theft, and child endangerment. What about the other children? Rachel asked, thinking of the frightened faces she'd seen at the dormitory, her heart aching for them. We're searching databases and contacting their families, Morris assured them. They come from various states across the country, so reunification will take some time. But Eugene here is very fortunate her family found her. After the interviews concluded, they stayed in the family room, a small sanctuary of peace after the storm. Daniel apologized for doubting Rachel's intuition earlier and calling her a false prophet, the words a painful reminder of the strain their ordeal had put on their marriage. Rachel smiled at the memory, a gentle understanding in her eyes. We shouldn't lose faith just because one person was a bad person, she said gently, her voice filled with grace. It doesn't mean all churches are corrupt. After all, it was a church that led us to finding our daughter again. A knock at the door interrupted them. Pastor Graham stood in the doorway, his face lined with distress and concern. I hope I'm not intruding, he said hesitantly, his gaze filled with sympathy. Detective Morris invited him in, and the pastor approached the family, his hands clasped before him, his posture one of humility and regret. I wanted to come personally to express how deeply sorry I am for what happened, he said, his voice thick with emotion, the weight of the betrayal evident in his words. We had no idea that we were harboring such evil in our midst. We've canceled tonight's service, of course. This wasn't your fault, Pastor, Rachel said, surprising herself with her capacity for forgiveness in the face of such pain. He deceived everyone, a master manipulator hiding behind a facade of faith. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the glass wall of the family room, they could see the police leading Matthew/Derek across the station in handcuffs, his head bowed, his aura of charisma replaced by one of defeat. Their eyes met briefly, and Rachel felt a chill run down her spine at the emptiness she saw there, the absence of remorse or humanity. Pastor Graham stepped forward again, a flicker of hope in his eyes. If you're staying in the area, I'd like to invite you to our prayer service next Sunday. Our congregation would be honored to celebrate Eugene's return with you, and perhaps your testimony might bring hope to others who are still searching for their loved ones. Rachel looked to Daniel, who nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. We'd be honored, she said, a sense of peace settling over her. After all, it was a church that led us to finding our daughter again. Later, as they sat together in their Airbnb, Eugene sleeping peacefully between them for the first time in 2 years, her soft, steady breathing a lullaby of relief, Rachel reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them here. A random tip, a Google Maps image, a mother's intuition that refused to be silenced, all converging to create the miracle they had prayed for, a testament to the power of hope and perseverance. I'm sorry I doubted you, Daniel said softly, careful not to wake Eugene, his voice filled with remorse. When you saw her on Google Maps, when you insisted on following Matthew's car, you were right all along. Rachel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Eugene's forehead, her heart overflowing with love for her family. Faith takes many forms, she said. Sometimes it's about believing in what you can't see, and sometimes it's about trusting what you know in your heart to be true, even when others doubt. Daniel reached across their sleeping daughter, taking Rachel's hand in his, their fingers intertwining, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey and the strength they had found in each other. Our faith was tested in ways I never imagined possible. I nearly lost mine entirely. But not completely, Rachel noted, her gaze soft. You were still beside me, still searching, still hoping. Because of you, Daniel admitted, his voice raw with emotion. Your strength carried us both. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to Eugene's steady breathing, each lost in their own thoughts about the remarkable journey that had led them here, a journey of loss and discovery, of doubt and faith, and ultimately, of a family made whole again against impossible odds. Thank you for reading our story. If you were touched by Rachel and Daniel's journey and Eugene's safe return, please consider subscribing to our channel for more inspiring stories. Your support helps us share these messages of hope and perseverance.